Hello, Geoengineering Free Canada. It's really a pleasure to be able to present for all of you and for the country and for anyone else who wants to listen. My name is Nikki Florio, and I'm the founder and director of Be Heroic. And Be Heroic is a pollinator and climate project. Before we get started, I'll give you a little bit of background on who I am and what I do and what kind of led me to Be Heroic, and then we'll get right to the lie in the sky. And the lie in the sky will cover kind of how we have been indoctrinated into not seeing what's happening in the sky. And then we'll go over geoengineering, the underlying technologies of the Great Reset, and then we'll do the close. What you'll see at the very beginning is me in this spot. I'm in near Lake Tahoe right now. And then when we go into the first section, we're going to switch over to another, the original presentation, which didn't get taped just because we had a few technical issues. So my background is in natural sciences and sustainability. My degrees are in natural sciences and humanities with the focus on environmental psychology. And when I was a kid, I grew up in the Central Valley of California. It was, farms everywhere. It was a small town. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I had moved to Lake Tahoe. And as a kid, I dropped out of school, but I really loved the environment. So I started taking landscape photography classes. So I was outside all the time. And with landscapes, you're looking at everything, all of the landscape and the sky and the systems that come in. And I was going to get a degree initially in the fine arts, and then switched over to natural sciences because I loved geology and geography and flora, fauna, blah, blah, blah. So when I finished school, I went back because there was a teaching program that would let me teach in California and Nevada. So I went to school for that. And then I ended up designing an environmental education program called TREE, Tahoe Regional Environmental Education. And it was a tri-branch. So we did education and education for elementary schools and high schools, and then all the way up to colleges. We did supplemental natural science and the true form of sustainability, not the sustainability that you see from the World Economic Forum or the United Nations. So we taught conscious consumerism. And then when we did our natural sciences projects, because I lived in the Sierras, we would go throughout California and Nevada and do different outside classes. So we studied everything, all of the natural sciences from the sky to soil. And around 2009, I started noticing, very, very big, obvious weather anomalies. And I would put them into the computer and it would come up as geoengineering. And I'd never heard of geoengineering. When we learned in meteorology classes, we learned about weather modification, basic cloud seeding and hail mitigation, but we didn't learn about geoengineering. And so I ended up closing out the environmental program that I ran, and took a few years off from that and did sustainability consulting, and then ended up moving to Colorado, where I founded Be Heroic. And I needed to find a venue to be able to present on geoengineering, because people back then in 2014 thought it was still thought it was a conspiracy theory. They thought it was a theory. And so I ended up meeting dozens and dozens of wonderful physicians and scientists and research specialists, and then a bunch of citizen activists since then. But back then, I wanted to make sure that I had our ducks in a row before we presented, and I needed a venue, again, a way to present it to the general public. So I chose pollinators, because the pollinator populations back then were already distressed, not as severely as they are today. So that's how we started Be Heroic. And Be Heroic exposes what I call kind of the trifecta of death, if you take out any one of these things. So agrochemical companies, agrochemical and chemical and pharmaceutical companies is one area. And then we also present on geoengineering and 5G. So we're going to kind of get into it and start with these topics: media and the mind, and underlying tech, and then what we can do for our planet. So the big lie in the sky, the foundation of all of the reset, is geoengineering. And controlling the weather means you can control entire economies and things like that. And we'll get into that pretty soon. But the first thing you have to do is distract people. So there's a social and technological way to introduce the fourth industrial revolution, or the fourth IR, or the Great Reset. So, you want to own and control humans if that's your goal, if you're a psychopath or ecocidal maniac. So what you want to do is make sure that an entire society is distracted. Or societies globally. So after our last major false flag event that started, grating away at our rights, which was 9/11, they had put all the planes on the ground, and the cell phones had just kind of come into play. I think, back in the early 2000s, we were still on Blackberries or whatever, but they were starting to introduce these different technologies. So by 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, everybody, most first world countries had very easy access to these devices. And video game companies and advertising companies were making big money keeping people on screen, and they still do, as long as they can. So what was happening in schools, in the United States anyway, back then, is there was a big indoctrination into science, technology, engineering, and math, these STEM programs. But they had conveniently left out, environmental sciences, true environmental sciences, and natural sciences. But at the same time, social media was taking off, Facebook and other social media venues back then. So they wanted people to just look very quickly and stop paying attention to anything outside of their screens. So people started going through screens more quickly, getting shorter little bits of information and trying to keep up with everyone. Years ago, Facebook used to have thumbs up and thumbs down. And then we went through the period where everyone has to be nice. So they took the thumbs down away and all of this stuff. So then YouTube had come out. And so there's videos for everything. And all of these quick bits and bytes of information keep people from actually stepping back and doing their own homework. People want to stay within their own social networks, and that's not a new thing. Societies have done that for decades. It's done. Indoctrination is done through everything from religion to sports events. People get really protective of their religion or their sport or their political affiliation, and so they stay within these little networks. But at the same time, becoming increasingly addicted to technology. People touch their phones anywhere from a few hundred to several thousand times a day. Far more times touching their phones and looking at their screens than they do with their own families or children or friends. And they're so addicted to technology that when they don't have it, they even will feel their bodies and feel around for it, or look for the technology somewhere. Anyway, so indoctrinating adults, there is a full indoctrination in language and thought and culture and behavior. Now, for older people, 50, 60, 70, 80 plus years old, when we were all kids, there was radio and then maybe a few channels on television. So you would be told to go outside and you would always hang out with your friends. And when you were doing something, you were always in that moment. You weren't worried about filming or what anyone thought and anyone else thought, and today, they've really gotten people to start sharing every single little thing they do. And there's also a lot of repetition, which they started in mainstream media and television and in television and through media, movies and things like that. The repetition is now so prevalent that people will repeat the same thing that they're discussing with you several times, several different ways. And then the language itself has been chopped up and refined. So some of the examples of language refined started from the shortening of words and phrases in texting. But even today, you hear a lot of repetition. Young people will say, like, like honestly, they'll use the word honestly, like, like honestly, it was perfect. Like honestly, it was like it was like honestly perfect. And I went to the mountain and I went to the fountain. And so they're mimicking and repeating the same words and same phrases over and over and over. And you hear this. So the word perfect, for example, instead of saying, yes, that's beautiful, that's wonderful, that's nice, thank you so much, or blah, blah, blah. There's a million things people can reply with, but they use that one word perfect, which was the new kind of one of the new indoctrination words at the very onset of the reset. Before that, they were, the Q words were honestly and to be honest. People never, they would say that occasionally, but it became just a big part of language. So this repetition and these particular phrases take away all kinds of other language that we would use otherwise in its place. It's a lot more colorful. So young people today who've grown up with paying attention to social media, they don't think for themselves. Even now, older people have infused themselves into their children's lives, so they don't think as much for themselves. People used to have common sense, which is sitting back and utilizing deductive reasoning and finding out what exactly is happening. Today, if you think for yourself, you're called a conspiracy theorist. But just so you know, it's better to wear a tinfoil hat than a dunce cap. Anyway, here's a wonderful example. Two people, they're going to be sleeping together tonight. They're wearing a mask that, generally on the boxes of masks, it says, this device mask does not stop coronaviruses. So they're, this virtue signaling. And it doesn't help anyone. It's very unhealthy. You're rebreathing toxic carbon dioxide that you've exhaled, as well as the bacteria and viruses that you've exhaled, you're re-inhaling them. So there's a lot of things wrong with this picture, but it's because we've been told by puppeteers, by the shadow government and by global elites, and these people, these billionaires and elitist families, they control governments, they control athletes, they control actors. And because we have such a marshmallow society now, where any little thing that conflicts with their thoughts burns their little marshmallow minds, they will actually listen to these people ahead of doing their own homework and listening to physicians or scientists or even expert research citizens. So when you have a handful of organizations with crossover chair members, and they're controlling the media, everything from news to entertainment and sports, and even the science foundations and information. And then they also have pretty tight reins on journalists. You don't end up with mainstream journalists anymore who are investigative journalists. So this is just one of many predictive programming cartoons. This one happens to be on the pandemic itself. And so we're going to show you this little cartoon.
I'd like to call to order this secret conclave of America's media empires. We're here to come up with the next phony baloney crisis to put Americans back where they belong, in dark rooms glued to their televisions, too terrified to skip the commercials.
Well, I think...
NBC, you are here to listen and not speak. I think we should go with a good old-fashioned public health scare.
A new disease. No one's immune. It's like the summer of the shark, except instead of a shark, it's an epidemic. And instead of summer, it's all the time.
That is smoking.
Now, I hate to be the guy who derails what everybody else loves.
He loves being that guy.
But, Janice, we do have standards. This can't be a made-up disease. The only moral thing to do is release a deadly virus into the general public.
We do have something we've been holding on to, but it hasn't been tested. Get over here, NBC.
Well, we certainly believe in testing, but
Wow. Wow. Oh,
yeah.
So we've got our deadly disease. Now we just have to blame it on something that's in every household, something that people are a little bit afraid of already. House cat flu is coming, people. The Center for Disease Disinformation predicts with some degree of probability that the house cat flu might spread in the following hypothetical outbreak pattern. So petter beware, that warm body on your lap just might be ready to destroy your tender fiddles. Springfielders are advised to stay tuned for more information if they experience any of the following symptoms: mild thirst, occasional hunger, tiredness at night.
Tiredness at night. So when we started using cell phones years ago in the 80s and 90s, they were these big block phones, and we would put them up to our ears. You could drive around with them, and then they got smaller and smaller and tighter. And today everybody has them. And these tiny phones that we have in our hands hold more than supercomputers did even half a century ago. But we use it today in society. It's mostly used for social media. And so young people get addicted to social media, and even adults as well. And so they're constantly, again, looking at their phones, so much so that they're not looking around. They're not looking at nature. They don't even look at their pets when they're walking around or when they're breastfeeding. When women are out, women and men, on playgrounds, you can always see them on their phones. You go to dinner, families are on their phones. So there's a very highly distracted society. And we do a whole entire other presentation on the impacts of 5G and the radiation on babies and children and environment and things like that. So maybe we'll share that with Geoengineering Free Canada someday. So when you're looking at your screens today, this is what you see. These are the most predominant colors on screens today, whether it's an advertisement or a movie. So this is gray and beige and taupe, gray, beige, taupe, and then these dull grays all the way to black. And occasionally you'll see, a few colors in there, kind of a blood red or a pink or a yellow or a green, but it's usually not what you see in nature. Nature itself is brilliant and vibrant. It's got billions of combinations of colors and textures, from the very whitest white to deep blues and greens and yellows and oranges and pinks. And yet we rarely see that. We rarely see that today anywhere. We rarely see those colors. So about 10 to 15 years ago, they started dulling down the colors, and in children's cartoons and advertisements and teenage video games, they started hazing out the backgrounds and putting in, aerosol lines. And there's no reason to do that other than to have it there so that these young people grow up seeing this in a background and thinking, and it's a kind of a perpetual repetition of these colors. So the only colors that you'll see generally in television advertising is the color of the logo and maybe one or two other colors, whether it's a leash or a tie or a vase or the base logo of the company. And they've also taken long-running TV shows are a very good way to see this. And it doesn't matter what the TV show is, they're all doing it now. From bright, colorful backgrounds and bright, colorful clothing to these hazy gray, beige, taupe. You see it in the movies, you see it in sports. It doesn't matter what the sports event is. They're changing entire stadiums to be gray and dull. Now, beige and gray, those are colors of apathy. They don't inspire, they don't make you excited. That's the reason that they make jails and prison facilities, dull and kind of blank and devoid of a lot of color and texture, because they want to keep the the prisoners, minds as dull as they can so they don't get excited. So with children's shows, they've even remade them to be duller and darker. And they've also modified the language in a lot of shows, and not just children's shows. In adults shows and in music, they've taken out a lot of the more broad language, and it's replaced by high repetition. And that repetition is then copied by society, which is why you hear young people today repeat like. They say like, like honestly, like I went to like the doctors, and then like I got home like, and it was like, it was perfect. So they'll reuse words. Perfect is a word, is the new pandemic word that they repeat. And then they also repeat all these other words.
Oh, cool. This is the
So-
lady staying with us. She's doing a geoengineering
So Melissa, you have your volume on.
Oh,
So they'll constantly repeat a lot of things in videos now to kind of shorten and lessen intellectual exposure to other words and other ideas and languages and things like that. So with the graying of what's outside, they've also done the same thing with fashion. Gray has become the color of everything from vehicles to restaurants. People are now painting their homes gray. Gray clothing is all over the place. And it's not just gray, it's all of these darker, duller, deplete colors. So that's how they've kind of captured our mind and rediverted our attention. So if you're an average person and you don't know about geoengineering and you never spent a lot of time outside as a young adult or a child, when you go outside and you see the perpetual haze, it doesn't mean anything to you because that's what you grew up with. So with the Great Reset, controlling the weather and the atmosphere is the foundation of the reset, because you can't have disruption in communications from ground to ground communications or ground to space communications. So this is the foundation for 5G, or the 5th generation technologies. And these are both the foundations for the 4th industrial revolution, or the transhumanistic agenda. So people talk about climate change a lot. And climate change has kind of evolved over the past, 20 or 30 years, or 30 or 40 years. I'm old. So it used to be called the greenhouse effect. So around the 1970s, it was called the greenhouse effect. And then it got changed to global warming in sometime around the 90s or the 2000s. And today it's called climate change. Now, if you think about a greenhouse in the capacity of sensory, when you walk into a greenhouse, if you close your eyes and you're standing in a greenhouse, the first thing you feel is that it's a moist environment. It's generally a more humid environment, especially if you come from a conventional area, regular area, forest or desert, and then you go in there, you really notice the humidity a lot more. And plants are very lush and very fragrant. And there's also, a good amount of oxygen in there. It makes you feel good to go into greenhouses. And carbon dioxide is so important in greenhouses that there are actually carbon dioxide emitters, these huge systems installed in large greenhouses to make sure that the plants are getting enough carbon dioxide. Yet in the past 50 years, we never went through a period where we had a huge explosion of trees because of extra carbon in the atmosphere. And I'm simplifying this, but I'm getting to a point here. So what we are experiencing on Earth right now
You're frozen.
We no longer smell our trees in the forest. We no longer smell sages in the desert when you drive through the desert. And if you go to the ocean and you crest hills, you sometimes, in many cases, at least in the US, you don't even smell the ocean anymore. You don't smell that briny, salty air. And we smell that smell because of all of the life and the plants in the ocean, as well as the chemical reactions in the ocean. So, so when they call it all these different names, it's because all of these different occurrences are happening. So with geoengineering, it's different. We know that geoengineering is a range of technologies that impacts the environment. But you cannot fight climate change, because climate is our set of weather patterns that take place over years, sometimes decades or longer, where weather is what is occurring immediately. So with weather, there are different variables, and the prime variable in weather is your proximity to sun on Earth. So your proximity to the sun, and then the different systems going around the northern and southern hemispheres, that convective current occurs through wind, but also other variables are landforms. So are you near a mountain range, and are you on the leeward side of the mountain, or are you on the head side of the mountain, the front end of the mountain, and what types of plants are available? And because plants will transpire and create their own cloud systems sometimes, and they'll cool areas. And what's your proximity to water, and what types of bodies of water are you near? And then other things like big fires and geologic events and space events, those things will also impact weather. But there's no reason that we shouldn't be seeing our weather and weather patterns in maybe a less form than we did even 20 or 30 years ago, if carbon dioxide were the problem. So we no longer see crisp, clear skies. We no longer see pure, billowy, beautiful white clouds that roll across the sky. We don't see our lenticulars in nature and in forests and meadows and even gardens. We're not seeing the big variables in plants, the different shades of green. What we're seeing instead today on Earth is a perpetual haze. And our clouds are also gray and beige and taupe. Our night skies are generally a hazy reddish brown. We no longer see full carpets of stars in the skies, even after extremely heavy rain or snow events. California recently had a huge atmospheric river come through. It absolutely wasn't, but we should have had the bluest skies and starry carpets at night, and yet we don't. We're having all of this beige stuff, and the sun is perpetually blinding. If you look at the sun, if you're driving east or west or walking east or west in the morning or evening, the sun is blinding, and not just for a few minutes like it used to be. Now it's sometimes an hour or two in the morning or the evening, where if you're driving in that direction, people coming head on need to have their lights on. And the moon is very hazy, because the moonlight is reflecting the light from the sun through this hazy aerosol layer. So what we're seeing is geoengineering. Now, geoengineering, for those of you just joining who may not be familiar with the term, is deliberate large-scale intervention in Earth's natural systems to counteract climate change. But that's only one definition, and the definition depends on the objective. So there's three separate objectives. The first objective in geoengineering is through science entities, and they do research and development and sometimes execution. And the two primary technologies are, one of them is blocking sunlight through solar radiation management, and the second is carbon dioxide removal, drawing carbon from the atmosphere. So universities will do research on cost and efficiency and environmental and human health impacts, or they'll do timelines with the different technologies. And so the different universities, and these are only a handful of hundreds of universities, and this doesn't even include all of the science foundations that are doing research and development. And these guys sometimes work within their own realm, or sometimes they'll partner with these other two areas. And the second area where the objective is oh, here we go. Sorry. I forgot I had this slide in here. So this is just a quick example of of one of the project partnerships where you have UC San Diego and the US Department of Energy and Scripps. So the Eastern Pacific Cloud Aerosol Precipitation Experiment is taking place from this month to this same time next year off the coast of San Diego. Now, they made this public, but it's one of many projects. Most of them are not made public, but you can find different lists of them on different websites like Geoengineering Monitor. Their geoengineering map has a bunch of other ones. So this is being executed without the general knowledge or consent of the community, because not everyone in that community knows about science projects, nor do they especially know about geoengineering. So the second objective in geoengineering is for government and military purposes. And in the US alone, you know, there are a lot of different agencies, Department of Defense, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and things like this. And we've been executing geoengineering in the military for decades, over 60 or 70 years. So this is one of the more well-known documents, and it's called Weather's a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. And way back in 1996, when this was written, they had outlined all of these different technologies and discussed ways to impact enemies and help make our own troops more comfortable. So it's everything from inducing drought or causing flooding, things like that, to helping our troops become more comfortable if there's a system coming in or whatever. So I want to note that on this, you see the word Microsoft. So Bill Gates, they had to get permission from Microsoft in order to use his clip art for this. So he probably found out about geoengineering years and years ago. So 2 years later, in 1998, Foundation's 2025 value model for evaluating future air and space forces was outlined. It was created to identify system concepts and technologies so that the US could have air and space dominance by 2025. So it goes along with owning the weather, the last document. So several hundred military experts got together and they wanted to identify key actions and different tasks that needed to be performed in order to have that control. So what they did is they created a mind map kind of outline that discussed different ways to protect ourselves from other countries through deception and disruption and corruption and things like that, but to also control enemies, foreign and domestic. And they could do this by observing them, collecting information, and then surveilling them, seeing how they're reacting. But they also wanted to be able to informationally, biomedically, psychologically, and physically control them. So the third objective with geoengineering is commercial. So owning the weather is a big deal, because a third of all industry on Earth is directly connected to the weather. And the other 2/3 of industry are either directly or indirectly connected to them. So the bigger investors in geoengineering is the military and conventional energy. And then these other groups can invest in weather modification and geoengineering, but they all benefit from it. So whether it's telecommunications, because you have to be able to control the weather if you want perpetual communications with your satellites, for example, for 5G, with 5G technologies, those millimeter waves don't travel very far. So we're putting hundreds of thousands of low Earth orbiting satellites in, and then millions of 5G towers both individually and on top of the 4G, 2 and 4G networks. And because those don't travel very far on the ground, they have to make sure that there's perpetual coverage of perpetual protection from unwanted weather. So both conventional and green energy need to control the weather, because you also have not only for drilling purposes, but for solar, for example. If you control the weather, if there's a country like Germany that has a high amount of solar, and you want them to buy more oil, or you want them to move towards nuclear energy, you can create a massive cloud, massive cloud system over that country perpetually, so they get less energy drawn. And then, for example, if you want to control alternative energy in a wind capacity, you can support wind by providing that wind through geoengineering, or you can execute a project that creates wind stilling, or the stalling of wind, so that those wind mills don't work, or you can freeze the area so that the turbines freeze. So with mining and agriculture is pretty self-explanatory when it comes to the benefits of good weather. Nano and biotech, and then transportation, of course. So these are a couple examples, one large and one small, of different weather modification companies. Weather Modification Incorporated is about 60 years old, and they do weather modification projects all over the world. This is a little example of them on the right. And these are just a couple of the countries, T through U, Turkey through the US. And you can see that they do some stuff with basic states. So the Delaware Department of Ag cloud seeding, but they'll also do weather modification projects with the state, or the Naval Surface Warfare Center. So these objectives are overlapping objectives. And then on a smaller scale, for weather modification, this is a little company out of the UK called Oliver's Travels, and for about $100,000, they'll rain a system out so that you have a sunny wedding, or if you're wealthy and your kid has a soccer game, you can make it nice for them. And you generally in the US have to go through licensing and regulation of your state to have this done, but you don't really have to directly contact the farmers and ranchers and let them know. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. This is a big commercial project between India and Canada. And as you can see here on the right, they have different projects that are completed and projects that are ongoing. So everything from weather modification, making rain, to carbon capture, afforestation. Afforestation, or the planting of forests, is a big part of the greenwashing under the United Nations sustainability program, because they're not talking about planting just any forest. What they're really working on are planting genetically modified forests with genetically modified trees and plants, and genetically modified agriculture. So these are things to be wary of. So a lot of you have seen this. This is Jim Lee's outline of different technologies. I think you have this on the Geoengineering Free Canada website as well. Jim Lee is speaking tomorrow. He's created climateviewer.com and weathermodificationhistory.com, two outstanding websites. So in this outline, it's got a bunch of different types of technologies that are used today. Sometimes they're used independently, and sometimes they're used in conjunction with each other. So the most common and visible of all of the technologies is the aerosol technology. So aerosols are generally nanomaterials, and they're combinations of nanomaterials. But the most prevalent for the first part of the first probably 20 or 30 years of the geoengineering practices has been the use of what's called the Welsbach patent, which is aluminum, barium, strontium, sulfur, etc., and then also coal fly ash derivatives, carbon black, and things like that. We'll be talking about that soon. But other elements include mycotoxins and graphene and elements, filaments in the atmosphere, and morgellons, which is what used to be considered an alien particulate, but has recently been written up by National Institute of Health. So these aerosols are distributed different ways. With commercial and military airlines, they do it through fuels or retrofitted systems that are put in planes, and then they're ejected out of nozzles around the planes. And then also stratospheric balloons and rockets. You may have heard MIT several weeks ago called out a company called Make Sunsets, who did an experimental geoengineering project, stratospheric aerosol project over Mexico, without the knowledge or consent of the Mexican government or the environmental minister, I think they said. So subsequently, they have outlawed geoengineering in Mexico. What the Mexican government does not know is that they have been engineering the weather going around Mexico and through Mexico now for years. And if anyone knows anyone from Mexico who would like to have a little chat, I would be more than glad to show them some information. So the third way that we make clouds with aerosols is through ship tracking. And right now, every ocean on Earth, all 5 of our oceans, has massive cloud layers on it, perpetually being engineered. Now, we used to, in the old images of Earth with satellites, you would see wispy, beautiful, swirling systems around the Earth, but you don't see that anymore. And with this blanket, when they don't stop the spraying in the evenings, it creates a blanket that locks heat in, so it exacerbates global warming. It exacerbates the warming of the oceans. Other technologies include ionospheric heaters, which superheat the ionosphere. They can raise and lower the ionosphere, but they also use this for inducing earthquakes, like the most recent engineered quakes in Turkey and Syria. A lesser impactful type of weather modification can be done with cloud ionizers. And China, even I'm not pro weather modification. In some areas, if you use weather modification, there are safer technologies for it. So in China, they built a huge weather modification system on I think the Tibetan plateau, and it feeds a handful of rivers that create energy through hydroelectric dams. And they also, it also helps put rain over farmlands. So that's how they're using it commercially. And they're very open about it. Laser technology is also used. It's less precise. It causes sometimes terrific flooding, like the project that they did in Dubai a couple of years ago. And then there's other pollutions, water vapor pollution, and then just basic cloud makers. So because geoengineering has been so ramped up, especially since 2000, the World Meteorological Society had to list new cloud types. So these new cloud types are listed through the WMO and AMS and other weather organizations. And the first cloud type listed is homogenitus, which means man-made. And it's also called persistent contrail, persistent spreading contrail. So they're these big aerosol trails right here. And then the other clouds, new cloud types that we're seeing that are made either directly or indirectly from this are going left to right from the bottom. We have shelf clouds and roll clouds, and the shelf and roll clouds are both part of the Arcus family. And then we have Kevin Helmholtz clouds. And then on the right-hand side, we have mammatus clouds and undulatus asperatus. And I was about 40, 45, almost 50 years old before I ever saw these two cloud types. And I have worked outside for about 35 or 40 years now. So with the massive increase in geoengineering, we're seeing a lot more anomalies in the sky. But people every single day all over the world take millions and millions of pictures of planes spraying. And Dane Wigington from Geoengineering Watch has a wonderful video. This is the video right here on his website. But you'll notice that in each of these images, there are different types of airplanes, but all of the engines are the same. These are all high bypass turbofan engines, and they're pretty much incapable of making a contrail unless it's under, you know, the most extreme conditions, because they were designed to not make trails. And then you see other anomalies, like only half the plane spraying. So I'm going to show you this video, and it'll take just a second to load. So what I want you to notice here is that they're spraying over the top of over the top of an existing cloud system. So here's a cloud layer. So you don't really see these, but here's the plane, and it has two engines, but the nozzles are mounted across the wingspan. So this is a wingtip to wingtip sprayer. So that's clearly not coming out of the engines themselves. And so when you have that, it's just a really good example of a close-up system. But you can have wingtip sprayers and a wingtip to wingtip sprayer, but they also will sometimes mount the nozzles on the fuselage of these planes. So if you want to create that first cloud layer, that homogeneous layer, you can do it with regular air traffic that's just flying around. They'll just get over an area and start spraying. And none of this has to do with the pilots unless it's a military project. Commercially, the pilots are just going from point A to point B. So you can systematically build through grids or through straight lines, and you can also mark areas. So sometimes you'll see an X or an odd thing like this, or you'll see a T or a marker or dashes where they're doing testing and all sorts of other things. Scott Stevens, who was interviewed in Why in the World Are They Spraying years ago in 2007, has a great explanation of the testing of these systems. So, fun fact, here we go. In the document Owning the Weather in 2025, they discuss the Air Operations Center and how you can remotely control you can remotely control planes and drones and things like that. So in this image on the left, you can see this long aerosol, and it's just cut off. You know, here's the plane. There is nothing in nature, in the atmosphere. You wouldn't suddenly have a space that went from minus 70 degrees or minus 40 degrees at 70% humidity. And by 40 degrees, I mean 40 degrees Fahrenheit. At 70% humidity, just completely stop. And you know, that's at least one of the variables that you need to make a natural condensation trail. So you'll also see these darker aerosols. This is carbon black. And they'll spray these aerosols early evening all the way through the morning. And they'll also spray these over storm systems or in the storm systems, which is why when a storm finishes today, when the storms are past, we still have perpetually hazy skies. And it doesn't take long to build this first homogeneous cloud layer. So this is a very common type of what they call new cloud, this new aerosol cloud. So from that cloud, I'm going to show you two more cloud types, and these are the most common cloud types that we see today. So this, when you add frequency to that cloud layer, that initial cloud layer, it becomes the new alto cirrus. So these look like kind of squished mashed potatoes. They look like someone took mashed potatoes or cotton balls and squished them between glass. A lot of you have probably already seen this. In nature, if you have a natural cloud that's made from true cloud condensation nuclei, and they're all put together into a nice, nice little cloud, and the cloud passes between you and the sun, it blocks the sun out. But with geoengineered clouds, the aluminum itself acts to refract the light. So when the sun comes through the cloud, it makes the sun a blinding blob because it's scattering the light particles with that tiny particulate. And if you're in this, if you turn around and look down behind you at the ground, what you'll see is a soft shadow, where you should see no shadow at all, or you should see a huge hard shadow. On a sunny day, when you have natural weather and the sun hits you, and the sun is bright in the sky, and you turn around and look down, your shadow is hard. You have a hard black shadow. So it's irrefutable evidence that it's not natural. Even if they say it's not geoengineering, they have to prove that this is natural, and they can't do that. So when you have metallic elements, iron oxides and aluminum in the atmosphere, you can move the systems around and move water around as well in the atmosphere. So that's the new Alto Cirrus, and this is a scalar cloud. This is a different type of frequency. So you have really tight scalar and broad scalar, and here you have a combination of the Alto Cirrus scalar, and you can see that bright blinding blob of a sun right there. And this is just an image with all three of the cloud types. So you have aerosol spraying down here. All of this is old ship tracking, which is aerosolizing over the ocean. This is even older ship tracking, and then you have scalar all up here. And the difference in time for these things, you can spray and have it almost immediately within seconds turn to either one of those clouds, or you can take minutes or several hours, depending on the product. So if you want to block an area, or you want to direct an area and move moisture around, you can do it fairly easily. So once the atmosphere is loaded with that metallic material, it becomes highly electrostatic. So we're seeing a lot more extreme storms today. So we're seeing lightning without thunder. We're also seeing record numbers of lightning strikes, from thousands to tens of thousands within a matter of hours. We see cloud to cloud extremes and cloud to ground extreme strikes as well. And this is also influencing hail. Now, every couple of years, the American Meteorological Society hosts what they call a Conference on Planned and Inadvertent Weather Modification. And I think they're on the 23rd or 24th conference. So it's been about 60 years that they've been doing this. And one of the issues that they spoke about a couple of years ago was aerosol cloud interactions and the impacts that they can have. So when you have this anomalous hail, it destroys not only crops, but it kills untold numbers, millions and millions of wildlife and livestock, as well as damaging property. And it causes, it wreaks havoc with these freezing systems that are also killing off, billions and billions of animals, wild and domestic, as well as humans. So ice nucleation chemicals are a huge part of geoengineering. But for wildfires, geoengineering has a different scope of impacts. This is a quick example of how to cap a convective system, how you stop clouds from developing. So going on the right-hand side, going from top to bottom, left to right, you can see that someone has laid an aerosol, and underneath it, there's a cumulus system that's rolling across this valley, and it's coming towards the photographer, and it's starting to build. So those cumulus clouds, if it's a really hot day, they want to become a cumulonimbus or a thunderhead, and they want to rain out. So if you want to keep that moisture in the atmosphere and you don't want that moisture dropping over an area, you lay this aerosol. So by the time it spreads out, you can see this really wants to become a thunderhead, but you can cap it. You can stop that moisture from forming. So with fires, you have a similar concept. So you have a huge wildfire down here, and you have a huge pyrocumulus cloud building, and it's going to get into this upper atmosphere and gather a lot of moisture. And when it does that, it becomes saturated, and it will create its own pyrocumulonimbus, its own thunder shower. So throughout millennia, throughout history, massive wildfires have caused rain ahead of the systems that help put the fire out. The rain falls ahead of the fire, and it cools the area down, so you have lower temperature and moisture. But what's happening today is they either block the moisture ahead of time, or they create this capped system to keep these fires perpetually going and not allowing them to go out. So if you speak to older firefighters, they say, we don't know why this is happening. You know, we don't know why these anomalies are occurring, blah, blah, blah. So a couple of years ago in California, and I apologize, by the way, that I don't have more Canadian info on here. I can provide it to you after the event if you want to email us. But so these are just some examples. So this is a NASA worldview, and if you have a tiny screen, you can't see this, but there's little aerosol lines in here, and then up here, obvious engineered aerosols. So this is a time-lapse video that Jovi Dane Wigington's wife took. It's quite fantastic.
Covert climate engineering.
And what I want you to see in this is that all of these aerosol lines are parallel. And when the sun goes behind them, there's a bunch of solar distortion. You'll see the sun changing shape as it passes behind these because of the metallics in here. Now, aluminum is a very bad particulate in geoengineering, and they've sprayed it over the world, over our farmlands and our forests for years now. And aluminum, nano aluminum gets soil, and then it's taken up through the root systems. And nano aluminum disrupts a plant's ability to take up both moisture and nutrients. And by the way, for anyone interested, we also work with companies that have great soil remediation products that are very inexpensive that help bind those toxins so they don't get into your plants. But anyway, the aluminum itself, it's not just that it's being taken up by the trees, but nano aluminum is used by the US military as an incendiary device because it has a lower flash point. So when a fire goes through these areas, the areas are superheated. So you can see that solar distortion very clearly. This was in the fall of 2018, but there definitely wasn't enough humidity in the atmosphere to make a natural condensation trail. So this goes back to 2007 when the US and Canada had their first, really huge, not their first, some of the first really massive wildfires. And you can see off the southern coast of Canada and western coast of the US that there are huge ship tracks. And those ship tracks are making an engineered cloud type. So they're blocking the moisture, but they're still letting the wind through, which is evident in the Idaho, Montana wildfires going across the whole US. So this is one of the documents written by Dr. Marvin Herndon and Dr. Mark Whiteside. They're both authors of several dozen human health and environmental impacts from geoengineering, and their website is Our Geoengineering Age. So if you want to take a look at that website, you can. They want to come at us from every angle. They've been doing this for a long time. And one of the best weather weapons is also one of the best money makers for weather disasters. And these are tornadoes and hurricanes and flooding events. So this year was this is 2022. Whoops. these articles are from 2022. You guys remember Hurricane Fiona, a historic event, even though it happened in the fall with fairly cool temperatures, which is anomalous for hurricanes and typhoons and things like that. This is from NASA Worldview, September 22nd, and you can see Hurricane Fiona there. One of the things that's changed about these hurricanes is you can see that there's first of all, a big square footprint around the hurricane itself, but the head wall or the lead wall should be much smoother than that. And then the dirty wall, which is the back wall where everything is blowing out, it's generally a little fuzzy. But you can see over the entire Atlantic that there's clouds everywhere. We no longer have broad open swaths of clear skies and blue ocean over any ocean. We're constantly engineering something over them. So by the 24th, you can see that's not even a hurricane or a tropical storm shape, and it is completely flipped upside down, where the head wall is to the south, and to the north, there's a massive lead wall. And if you happen to get on NASA Worldview website and look at this map, if you zoom in, what you see along every edge is engineered alto cirrus and scalar clouds. And then over to the right, kind of southeast of the Labrador Sea tidal right there, you can see ship tracking and dark aerosols over that as well. So right after that, we had Hurricane Ian. This is on September 26th, heading up towards Florida. And just 3 days later, it became several thousand miles long. The dirty wall expanded all the way up to the edge of Canada and up to Greenland. And again, if you zoom in on this, if you have time to take a look, you can see all of the footprints of an engineered system. So in 2008, after Hurricane Katrina, then the Department of Homeland Security and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, got together and had a meeting in Colorado, which is the global hub of geoengineering, discussing hurricanes and hurricane modification and hurricane suppression. And then the following year, Joe Golden, who was at that meeting, got together with his group and created the HAMP program to study how carbon black materials could intensify hurricanes. But he already knew this. If he didn't, he's a complete idiot, because I knew this, and it's not my job to know those things. And I mean, it is now, but it wasn't then. So way back in 1974, Dr. William Gray was working with the Department of Defense, and he found out that you could deliberately intensify and steer hurricanes with engineered floods and drought as a weather weapon, and you could also melt ice under military control in the Arctic. So it's a huge moneymaker, as noted before. 2021 and 2022 were multi-billion-dollar weather and climate disasters, as they say here. So on the back end of this, you have people who go in and revamp all of the infrastructure. Military contractors and energy companies like Bechtel Power and Halliburton, who was the U.S.'s biggest contractor during after the 9/11 false flag event. So the money just keeps being made. Now, if you really want to put the smart city infrastructure, the 15-minute infrastructure in as quickly as possible, you want to get it close to bodies of water. You want to hit a bunch of big cities at once, and these big storm events are a good way to do it. So they clear everything out, they rebuild all the 5G infrastructure, and everything gets set up for surveillance, and then they're pretty much good to go in those areas. In 2012, Matt Anderson, who was employed by Booz Allen Hamilton, he was a former executive advisor for aerospace and defense, stated that few in the civil sector understand that geoengineering is mostly a military science, and that the US, including Russia, China, and Israel, possess the technology to regularly alter the weather and geologic events for different types of military and black operations. So we have the ability to induce, enhance, and direct cyclonic events, earthquakes, and flooding, and also we can use polymerized aerosol viral agents and radioactive particulates to be carried through global weather systems. And though themes in public debate, including global warming, have been subsumed into larger military and commercial objectives that don't have anything to do with broad public concerns, these include the gradual warming of polar regions to facilitate naval navigation and resource extraction. So for the past couple of years, our systems, they don't break up across the US and Canada. Weather systems are not behaving the same way. They're not, for example, if you have a system coming across in Canada and it hits a mountain range, it should be in the summer when it's hot, it should build up and create thunder showers that cool the area in the evenings. And then, you know, the system should be wrung out and the moisture should move. But we have entire blocks of moisture, entire weather systems that bypass an area and don't release any moisture, and then release horrendous amounts of moisture downstream. And that's in the way that it's going, that has nothing to do with any of the variables needed for natural weather. And that's because of this. So when you funnel warm water and moisture and warm air across northern US and Canada, and you put it in Iceland, you can melt back a glacier fairly quickly. Excuse me, that's probably really loud in your ears. So here we are in 2022, and Jeff Bezos and Gates and Bloomberg, they're all betting that there's going to be enough critical minerals in Iceland to power hundreds of millions of electric vehicles. So the greenwashing of the smart technology, it just does not end anywhere. And if you notice in the lower right, you have Greenland right here. You have these little natural clouds. And then above it, you have an engineered scalar system. Sorry, that's an itty bitty image. But what they're doing is they're locking that heat in all day and all night so that the area doesn't cool or create its own natural clouds. And Bill Gates has been involved in weather modification for years and years now. He helped with a massive project in the Pacific, the Silver Lining Project, 6,000 square plus miles, 10,000 square kilometers. And sorry, it's not 6,000 square miles. My math is really bad. This went against the United Nations, protocol. And one of his big buddies is David Keith, who is a professor of applied physics at Gordon McKay and also works at Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences and Harvard Kennedy School. So he owns a company that does carbon capture and storage, and he's also the lead of Harvard Solar Geoengineering Research Program. And in 2010, he wrote a book called A Case for Climate Engineering. And after he did that, he was on the Colbert Report. So we're going to play just a quick little clip of his talk with Stephen Colbert.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a ugly tech fix.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You'd start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in
No,
emissions.
we'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down,
Okay.
but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was
Really?
known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely. The
That
fact
the
is
United
government-
States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.
Okay, so instead of spending, millions or hundreds of millions of dollars alleviating the issues, the real issues of what's changing the climate and weather, he's been spending these past couple decades trying to find ways to exacerbate the problem and make money off of it. So his research group out of Harvard is FICER, the Fund for Innovative Climate and Energy Research, which is funded in large part by Bill Gates. But the money goes to different grantees in different universities. And years ago, when David Keith was discussing geoengineering, he stated that it wasn't really a moral hazard. It was more like free riding on our grandkids. So I don't know if he actually has grandkids, but if he does, I bet that they hate his guts. So what about weather in the news? When we watch TV, everyone has kind of a little weather app on their phone. And if you have an app on your phone or you're watching the news, you probably noticed that it'll always, you can have a 10-day forecast, but 2 days in, it'll change. And then 3 days in, it'll be completely different 10 days out, and it won't even look like the first section of what you saw. And that's because of all of the geoengineering. They're constantly engineering the system so quickly that the news can't keep up with it. But that's not the only reason. And if you notice, this is a little fun fact here. In this image itself, there is a double rainbow. And these double chemical rainbows, these chembos, are now far more common than the natural rainbow, which has a lower arc and a full spectrum and a single rainbow itself. Okay, so here we have a bunch of different newscasters. They're all sitting there reading a screen. They might tell you the temperature and the barometric pressure, and you'll see on the screen that there's sometimes engineered clouds in the background. But what you mostly see is Doppler and NextRad radar. If you were born in, if you were conscious, if you were a little kid or an older person, prior to the 1980s, they actually used to show you satellite images. And they would tell you how the system was coming in, when you should expect rain or snow, how many inches of rain or snow. And believe it or not, today, after all of the trillions, gazillions of dollars that's been being spent on this, back then, they were more on point with what was going to happen with weather than they are today. But a lot of these people, because they're reading from screens, they're not paying attention to what's outside or how the systems are being built or engineered. And then you also have the National Weather Service, who has employees who are no longer allowed to discuss what's happening with the weather. They've been kind of bound by an illegal federal gag order restriction, so they can't disclose information. And Dane Wigington from Geoengineering Watch and his legal team got a FOIA request and found out that Raytheon, who is a U.S. military contractor, is the one who is telling the news stations what they can and cannot disclose about weather. So geoengineering has huge impacts from the top down, has catastrophic impacts. We don't even have time. This is a full day presentation in and of itself, but we'll cover some very basic things. Firstly, the ozone layer. The U.S. and other countries that were doing nuclear testing in the past 70 years have already caused tremendous damage to the ozone. But when you add barium and carbon black and the other elements to the ozone, it has huge effects. And we no longer have just thinned ozone at the poles. In the equatorial region, we have a hole or a thinning that is spreading out, which is why now when it's only 70 degrees or so Fahrenheit outside, I apologize, I don't know, I don't know Celsius. When it's maybe spring weather, the sun sears your skin if there's no wind, and that's because UVC radiation is now coming through. Now for us, that's a bad thing, but for soils and plants and animals and things that live outside, it's a much bigger problem. Additionally, with geoengineering, that reduction in humidity causes big problems because there's a microbiome on the soil that needs that moisture or the dew in the morning, and on plants that need that moisture. And then also with weather whiplash, plants have huge problems. And also with droughts and floods and freezing and burning, there's huge issues that way too. With smaller animals, pollinators and insects and things like that, they also need that morning dew, because if you're an insect, a beetle that doesn't fly much, or if you're an ant or a slug or a small animal or fungi, you need that humidity in the morning. And if you're eating or drawing nectar from plants, or taking the pollen, and that's loaded with this nanomaterial, it causes huge problems. And with grazing animals, it disrupts their gut microbiome, causes immune system damage. With the weather whiplash, you have disruption in mating season and migratory seasons. And then blocking sunlight is really bad if you're an animal that navigates, like some ants or insects and birds that use different types of sunlight for navigation. For humans, it's equally as dangerous. We have only mostly focused on the aerosol geoengineering, and so this is a document from from Biomed Central, and it's an environmental health journal. And what they demonstrate here is that these primary elements used in solar radiation management impact every system: hepatic, endocrine, renal, respiratory, immunologic, neurologic, reproductive. It goes on and on. These are not healthy, not healthy technologies. So it is definitely geoengineering and not cow farts that's causing these big problems in the environment. So if we want to incite meaningful change, we really need to act quickly. We are at the very, very, very end of the very tiniest thread of the rope of being able to preserve these remaining ecosystems, and then returning as many as we can to healthy ecosystems. So in the United States, there are different groups in the US and other countries that are working on different problems. At the international level, Jim Lee is starting and currently working on rewriting the ENMOD, or Environmental Modification Treaty, basically, that was put into place after the US used weather warfare against Vietnam to stop the Vietnam War, Project Popeye. And so different countries agreed to it, but it doesn't mean, signing an agreement doesn't mean you're not going to do it. So at the state level, there's a group called Zero Geoengineering that was started by Dr. Rosalind Peterson and Jolie Diane. And that outlines how each state in the US can expose and expose the groups doing geoengineering, and also fine them. And that can be modified for Canada as well. So Geoengineering Watch, most people are familiar with that. That's Dane Wigington's website. He's working with a team of lawyers for U.S. I think U.S. and Canadian lawsuit. But somebody in the notes corrected me earlier on that. So I want to give a shout out to friends and fungi out there, because we're getting close to the end of this presentation. So we live on this amazing planet, just extraordinary, but it's the itty bitty tiny, microbes and earthworms and fungi and all the animals in the soil and all the animals in the ocean, phytoplankton and zooplankton and things even smaller that we don't see, that we don't even pay attention to. It's all out there living, and it's all allowed the earth to become what it is today so we could be here, so we can live happy, healthy lives. We have an extraordinary array of environments that we can visit. And these are extremely important to save, not just because we need to save them, but for they themselves, because we share this planet with, billions of other animals, millions of species, and they're all together. They have families just like we do. They care about their young just like we do. They can express love. They have partnerships that last a lifetime. They have friends of other species just like we do. They all deserve to live healthy, independent lives free of human technology and human interference. They all need to feel safe in the same capacity that we do. And even when we don't see them, they're there. They're there all the time, but they are disappearing. We are going through a mass extinction event, 200 to 300 times the rate of natural extinctions. And they're hanging out there all the time. Every day we need to do something to protect them. So when we eat our food and when we go through our ecosystems, we have wind and water that for the first several billion years were the only things that needing plants and on land and in the ocean. And then as flowering plants evolved, the scope of the pollination, the winged and terrestrial insects and birds and bats and small mammals and other animals came to be. Now humans, we wouldn't have evolved without pollinators, because the most nutrient dense foods that we eat come from these animals, and they protect our food systems, or they pollinate our food systems, they pollinate our ecosystems, and they are, just an incredible collaborative of life that is just amazing. So just wanted to take a minute to thank all of these guys. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That was incredible. Amazing.
Are you guys still there?
Please. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I was like, was I just talking to myself that whole time?
Yeah, we're here, and we would like to thank you. Really, that was an incredible presentation.
Thank you.
Wow, is there anybody that has a question for Nikki?
How do we get a copy of her
Yes.
slide presentation to share with you?
Yes, I have recorded the Zoom, and I will share this.
Even just if you just have the slide presentation to send it to people as PDF.
Okay. Nikki, are we going? Will you actually provide us with your slideshow so that we can share this with other people?
These presentations are massive. They are they're too big to share. Usually if it's recorded, we just send a link.
Okay. All right. Yes, it's been recorded, so I will share the link then. Okay. Anything else for Nikki? David?
Are the commercial planes involved in doing this? And do you have an estimate of how many planes in the world are involved? Hundreds, thousands?
Did you hear
that? Yeah. So there are commercial and military planes that are involved, and the U.S. military itself owns several hundred commercial planes. And there's a whistleblower doing a discussion on a website called Tanker Enemy, which is a great Italian website. And if you watch the video, he discusses what happened during 9/11. They retrofitted the planes, and then this fellow was a baggage handler, and they had them modify how they put bags in after that. And if you remember, prior to 9/11, everybody would just bring their large suitcases onto the plane. And then after 9/11, they encourage people to just use the overhead compartments. And even though it's dirt cheap to fly, you still have to pay a lot of money if you want to put your baggage underneath the plane. So, he stated, I think in there, and it's subtitled, so if you don't have to speak Italian, they want to discourage people from putting too many bags under the plane. And in the planes out there, they had the baggage sections were sectioned off into 3 sections. And for balance of the plane, prior to 9/11, they'd always load the front compartment first. And after 9/11, they had them load from the back to the front. So so that the retrofitting of the planes, much of it probably happened back then. But I forgot the second part of your question.
Do you know how many roughly planes?
Oh, roughly. Oh, I don't know. I don't know a particular number, but from the images I've seen, close-ups of planes in the U.S. anyway, the planes that are spraying, United, Virgin Airlines. I've seen Frontier many times, Southwest many times. So they're all doing it. And I've even, gotten off of a plane during our tour. We did the tour called the Pollen Nation for a couple of years, and I had to fly out to Hawaii. It was one of the last times I flew. And in Hawaii, you get out onto a tarmac, and the whole way over, I was looking out the window. Everyone else in the plane is on their computer, and I was just counting all the planes that were going across the Pacific that we could see, while I was flying. And I got off and waited for the pilots to come out and asked them if they knew about geoengineering. And I had a couple pamphlets with me on geoengineering. And I asked them, I took photos of the nozzles mounted above the engine and on the tail and on the fuselage. And I said, do you guys do plane checks? And I said, yeah. I said, what are those little nozzles? And they were like, we don't know. So I don't know if those nozzles that we saw were some of the same nozzles that sprayed, but the one guy says, I've been around these planes all my life. I never noticed those. So they just don't know. It's probably on most of the commercial planes. You can speak with Dane or Jim Lee about that. And I don't know if Jim is on the same page with the aerosol side of geoengineering, but you could ask him, and he's brilliant in a lot of the areas related to geoengineering.
Anybody else? Okay, we've got one more question.
What else can we do? What can we do to get involved? It's so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else can we do?
Yeah. What else can we do?
So every day you need to speak with someone that is unfamiliar about geoengineering. And this is a really uncomfortable thing to do at first, but and not if you're hanging out at home. Don't deliberately leave and come back. But when you're out, if you're out in a parking lot or something and you see something, talk to people and say, hey, do you see that? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. We're also working with a couple of groups you can support. So that's on your end, what you can do. And you can also host different little meetings with geoengineering and go to web pages and learn about geoengineering and then share that information. Our web page is beheroic, beheroic@gmail.com. And on our geoengineering page, we have a basic introduction to geoengineering, and then we cover all of these different individuals and organizations. And each one of them has video, has PDFs, and has links to the websites. So you find the area of geoengineering that's most interesting, and that's what you share. But hosting an event and showing a video, we have all kinds of videos and documentaries on there, and so you can host an event and share that information, and then get together with Geoengineering Free Canada and get together with groups that are filing the lawsuits. We're trying to work with some attorneys in San Diego, and I just got put in touch with some of the attorneys from Dane's team. So we hope to be working with them. So if you can provide support in helping with events, or if you can provide any kind of financial support, $5 a month, $20 a month to these groups, anything you can do that way is extremely helpful. Because if we don't, these underlying technologies, geoengineering and 5G, if we can stop those two technologies, they can't have the reset. You can't have perpetual surveillance if you have moisture in the atmosphere and natural systems going through. You can't have perpetual surveillance if 5G is not available. And so fighting both of these technologies, pick one or the other and support each other. Stopping those technologies is a way to stop the World Economic Forum and that group. We didn't elect them. It's an unelected group that's steering this Titanic. So just do as much as you can.
Yeah, and I would like to pick up on this one here. This is part of our presentation that I certainly will not put it up right now because we're running a little late. Anyway, but this is part of us here. This is exactly what we're doing. And this is on our website, the geoengineeringfreecanada.com website. So what can you do? You can write letters and articles or books or whatever, speak out, contact radio shows, ask them to share your story, send emails to MLAs. I know they are so super lazy, I know. But you know what? The more we bombard them, the more effective we are. Right, and the more we spread the word to them, they are just I know. Environmental organizations host film nights. This is exactly what Nikki just said. Right, the dimming is a perfect example. Or there is a lot of other videos out there from Jim Lee. They are just incredible. They are an hour long or something like that. It's not outrageously long that you keep your people glued to a seat or something like that. It's really very, very informative. And network at large events. We've got the rallies going on here. I'm the founder of the Ocean to Ocean Freedom Rally. We've got the rallies going on in Kelowna. They're everywhere. So go out there and speak to people, share the information, and take pictures, obviously, send them to us. You can email us, Geoengineering Free Canada at proton.me is our email, or you can just hop on our Telegram group or on Facebook and share your pictures. We compile this data. We just formed another group outside it's actually not outside, but it's within the admin group. We have a group that is now compiling all this data. When are they flying? You want to find a pattern. When are they flying? Where did the plane take off and where it's headed to? So what is going on? So that's exactly what we are doing here. That's our admin group, and you can do the same thing. Just form an action group and sit together, compile the data, and then share it with us, share it with other groups, and spread the word. Yeah, and then like I just said, join a group, and then Nikki also mentioned the financial aspect of it, it's really, really important. And we need to cover our cost here. We do have, you know, the room costs, for example, and I'm traveling quite a bit right now. So to spread the word and to raise awareness, and this unfortunately certainly costs money. But speaking to that, what our ultimate goal here is with Geoengineering Free Canada is not just to raise awareness. We certainly want to take one really big action, and this is we want to go up in the air and we want to take air samples, and that's hugely expensive. And I hope that Dane Wigington will help us to actually to form and kind of a project and you know, share the information he's got, because he went up and took the air samples already, so he knows what's involved, and he hopefully will be able to help us a little more to get to our, and we estimated $60,000. I have no idea if that's a true estimate. It all depends on the plane. It all depends on if a pilot can take us up there up to between, Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, between 28,000 and 40,000 feet. Is that correct?
When they say stratosphere, the stratosphere is a lot lower than what people assume. So
okay. So
yeah, Dane and his.
I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Dane and his team can help you with that.
Yeah. Okay. See, there you go. But that's our goal, because in order to take legal action, and this is what we want to do, and this is what I will be doing, I will personally take legal action. But what we need is we need Canadian evidence. The findings, the US findings are great to support a court case here in Canada, but we need Canadian evidence. And that's why we want to take those kind of actions. And yeah, so this is what Geoengineering Free Canada is all about. We want to take action, and at the end of the day, we're going to take legal action as well. Yeah, so this is actually what we are all about. So we would like to thank you. Is there anything else for Nikki? Is there any other question? Okay.
The military pilots that fly these airplanes, do they not know that they're poisoning their own families too? And the rich people, they're going to kill off the earth, and that includes them.
Yeah. Did you hear that, Nikki? Okay, the question was, the military pilots that are flying those aircrafts, do they actually not really know that they're poisoning their own families?
They do know that they're spraying, and I don't know how they choose the pilots. I don't know how indoctrinated the pilots are who execute these projects for the military. There are a handful of military whistleblowers that end up getting demoted or fired, or have to sign agreements to not discuss what's going on. So I don't know how they could do that to their own families. I can't answer that question.
Yeah, of course. All right, if there's nothing else, I would like to say a big thank you to you, Nikki. That was absolutely incredible. Thanks for finding us. Really interesting. And
good.
Oh, one more question.
So in summary, what's the solution is raising awareness, education, and legal means. Is that kind of the summary? Is there anything else?
So if you have a community that is getting highly impacted by geoengineering, so our project, we do issues, impacts, and solutions for different things. With weather modification, you can sometimes create a system over an area that has induced drought or has flooding, or has temperatures that are too cold or too windy. We work with a group out of Australia that has helped alleviate catastrophic winds from that were impacting the wildfires in Australia. They've done humanitarian projects in 3 countries in the Horn of Africa that had their water cut off through a very obvious geoengineer footprint. So this company uses ground-based ionizers and satellite resonance